Hello everyone, Sientir here with another Rambler, and this is going to be kind of the next part in my Baseline Christian Theology series, as I have it noted in my internal notes. And today I kind of want to talk about an interesting topic that I don't think gets discussed a lot, which is, what is a God anyway? So this sort of question is one that kind of needs to be broken into two parts, because the way I see it, there tends to be two types of gods that are referred to. The first one is kind of the popular concept, something that I like to refer to as a deity, and it refers to a kind of being. So in this concept is where you see things like Thor in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, or in Magic the Gathering you have like Hazard the Fervent, or was it Helios, God of the Sun. This is sort of a class of being that is seen to have certain sorts of powers. Usually this can be classified as like authority over some domain, usually coupled with superhuman strength or other sorts of abilities. And this sort of concept, again, I like to refer to it as deity, but this sort of concept of a god is sort of a classification of being. And that's kind of a common one, but it's a limited sort of view. And what I mean by that is, the other sort of classification is a relationship, a type of relationship. And this is the one that I think is more interesting. This is the one that I think is sort of worth examining in more detail, because there's a lot there to this concept. So to kind of explain what I mean by a type of relationship, and again, this is going back to sort of the biblical understanding. God is not a name, but it's used as a name similar to like dad or father or mom or sister or aunt or teacher, employer, employee. These are all names for types of relationships. Friend is another one that's popping into my head. And these sorts of relationships have with them some sort of understanding of what that sort of relationship is. For example, a father is usually a man who has some sort of position of authority over a child during their upbringing. Typically, there's a biological component, but there doesn't have to be. And this is where we get to things like a father figure, for example, is someone who had that sort of mentoring, guiding role in someone's life, but is not an actual, like, not their parent, but sort of fulfills that role that is that father describes. It's that sort of relationship. So God, in many senses, is that same sort of thing. It's not a name. It's a type of relationship. And the reason why I say a type of relationship is because if you look at sort of the way that these sorts of things are handled, when somebody actually believes in a particular deity, and here I'm using deity in the sense of a being of superhuman capability, then they do specific things. For example, they try to gain that being's favor because they believe that if they can have that being's favor, that being will be able to help them, make their lives easier, provide rain, all sorts of different things. So there's a certain level of authority then that's ascribed to a deity, again, as we already established in the first minute or so of this. And that God relationship, sort of God worshiper relationship, is one of dependence, trust. These can all be kind of words for faith. And to take a moment, actually, I think it's good to think about what faith is. So I've heard a very good description, and this is: faith is not the opposite of doubt, it's the opposite of control. And I think this is kind of a profound thing to think about for a moment. Faith being the opposite of control, not the opposite of doubt. So if you have faith in something, a really good example of this is faith in another human being to do a job that they're assigned, then you let them do that job. You might have doubts about whether or not they can perform it, but if you don't have faith that they ultimately will, then you'll try to control, and we call that micromanagement typically. And at that point, it's really not like accomplishing much. So this idea of control is very paramount. So it is this level of trust, in other words, that faith entails. And it can be useful to examine things in relation to sort of their opposites. And so it's what sort of controls your life. Another way to think about it is, what do you think of, if I had more of that, my life would be better? This is sort of a statement of faith, right? It's saying, I believe that if I had more of thing X in my life, then my life would be better. It's a sort of trust statement. And this, in my mind, implies sort of a God status given to the object that is desired. So for a lot of people, they say, oh, if I had more money, my life would be better. And to some extent, that probably has some accuracy to it, but it depends upon what you mean by better as well. And for a lot of people, what they mean is happier. And that's not necessarily going to be accurate. And that's kind of a statement of making money a god, right? Is to say, oh, if I had more of this, my life would be better. Or if I only had this, is another really good way of looking at it. For me personally, something that I struggle with a lot, and this is a complex topic to some extent that I'll be discussing more later, I think, but is not wanting to basically worship the idea of a wife. I'm a single guy, and it's really easy for me to think, oh, if I had a wife, thing X in my life would be better. But that's a sort of deifying thought process, right? It's turning the wife notion into a god, because I'm trusting it to, or relying on it to do something that in reality it probably can't do. And that's one of the really important things to this process as well, is that, and that's something we call idolatry, which is expecting something to be able to do something it can't do in a certain sort of way, particularly in this sort of godhood way, is idolatry. So that's looking to something to do something that it can't. This is really easy to see when you look at like statues, for example. If somebody is like, hey, I've carved a statue of this thing and I'm calling it a god, and I'm expecting it to bring rain if only I give it food every day. And it's like, why? A piece of wood doesn't have any sort of power to do that. You'd be better off using that piece of wood to carve a pipe to divert water. Not that a wooden pipe would necessarily be great for that long, I don't think, but anyway, that's getting a little off topic. I think going back to sort of the central idea then of what is God as a relationship, it's sort of, what do you trust your life in? And what I mean by that, specifically by life here, is how, like, what do you expect to, this is going to be a little hard to figure out the wording for. What do you trust will have the ability to make things better if stuff goes horribly wrong? Or what do you hope in? And I think hope is probably a useful thing to think about here. And again, I'm kind of like puzzling through this as I go. This is kind of the point of these Ramblers, right? Is where I kind of talk around a topic to try to understand it better. So as I kind of think about this, because it's an idea that is in my head and I wanted to explore it, and it makes a lot of sense to me, and sort of quantifying sort of the relational aspects. What sort of do people look to a god, as it were, to provide? And usually it's things like security and safety, food, shelter, sort of the needs of life. And for a lot of people, I think it can be, or comfort as well, happiness. So let's run through that again. Shelter, security, food, happiness, and often purpose as well. And I think that if we kind of look at these things, people can have different sort of beings or things that they look to for these. Guidance can be another one, I think. Not 100%, but to some extent guidance as well. And that kind of goes into the purpose angle of things. And what I think can happen a lot is that people will sort of make different things gods for different stuff. Money is very popular for things like security, safety, food, but money can't buy you food if no one's selling food, right? It can't actually like provide food. It can't cure famine or whatever. It might be able to allow you to take higher priority in obtaining food as long as the person selling food has enough and wants your money more than their food. But like, and this is just kind of a contrived example, but it's that fundamental sort of principle of what are you trusting in. A lot of people end up kind of making their God themselves. They trust in themselves. They try to control their entire life. They try to say, okay, I can do all of these things myself. This is particularly a problem, I think, that can happen in at least the United States, where there's a very strong independent streak and a sort of pull myself up by my bootstraps mentality, which is a very odd image because you don't have any leverage when you're trying to pull yourself up by your bootstraps unless you're like hanging off of something, in which case you're more like, anyway, one of these days I'm going to do a Rambler on idioms and euphemisms and stuff with language because I think this is really bizarre, but that is not this one. So getting back to sort of this topic here, I think it's worth examining sort of your own life for what things do you trust to provide you a purpose? What things do you trust to provide for your security, your sense of hope? Purpose and hope are often kind of linked as well. Comfort, happiness, and consider if those things that you're looking to provide those can actually do so. And it just is a personal stock or evaluation. So anyway, that's I think that kind of summarizes it. Again, I think this idea of a God being a relationship, a type of relationship, is an interesting one to think about. So I think, again, that I've covered my topic. So I wish you all farewell. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.